What if a single man from the windswept steppes of Mongolia could outthink, outmaneuver, and outfight every great army of his time? What if his genius for strategy, not his brutality, was the real reason he built the largest empire the world has ever known? This is the story of Genghis Khan, the master of impossible odds, the nomadic warlord who rewrote the very laws of conquest. He didn't just fight battles. He engineered them, turning chaos into coordination, fear into loyalty, and the scattered tribes of the steppes into a weapon that would bring empires to their knees. His enemies thought they faced a barbarian. They were wrong. They faced a mind centuries ahead of its time. By the end of this story, you'll see how Genghis Khan transformed from an outcast boy, hunted and betrayed, into the architect of the world's greatest empire, and how his tactics still echo in modern warfare today. So, if you've ever wondered how one man could conquer from Korea to Europe, stay until the very end, because what you're about to hear isn't just history. It's a masterclass in strategy, survival, and the psychology of power. Let's begin. The boy who was left to die. Have you ever wondered how the world's greatest conqueror began not as a prince, but as prey? What kind of fire is born inside a child who's abandoned by his own tribe, hunted like an animal, and left to starve in the cold Mongolian wilderness? Before he was Genghis Khan, his name was Temujin, a name that meant iron. Yet, in the beginning, there was nothing iron about his fate. The boy was barely 9 when his father, Yasuge, was poisoned by a rival tribe. Overnight, the family's protection vanished. His mother, Holin, stood alone with 7 children, surrounded by enemies on the vast steppe where mercy had no meaning. Their clan turned on them, taking their herds and leaving the family to die in the open plains. Temujin watched the horizon, each day for riders, sometimes hoping they'd bring help, sometimes fearing they'd bring death. Hunger gnawed at his stomach until grassroots became food. The once proud family of a chieftain became ghosts of survival. And yet, in that emptiness, something was forged. The boy who had nothing learned that strength was not inherited. It was built. One bitter night, under a sky so clear it seemed to mock his misery, Temujin made a silent vow. He would never be weak again. Never bow, never beg, never starve in the shadow of others. His world had stolen his father. He would steal back destiny itself, but destiny is a cruel teacher. Not long after, a rival clan, the Taishid, captured him. They tied him to a wooden yoke, parading him through their camp like a trophy. Every movement was humiliation. Every breath a reminder of his captivity. He was mocked, beaten, starved again. Yet even as he staggered under the weight of the yoke, Temujin's mind stayed sharp. He studied his captors, their routines, their weaknesses, the way their guards grew complacent after dark. One night, as the camp drank itself to sleep, Temujin took his chance. A sympathetic guard, a boy not much older than him, helped him slip away. The chains fell, and Temujin vanished into the black of the steppe. Alone again, but free. That escape was more than survival. It was his first victory. Imagine the wind on his face as he ran under the starlight, barefoot across frozen ground, chased by hounds and fate itself. That night, the hunted boy became the hunter. The seed of Genghis Khan was planted in that moment, not through power, but through pain. Years passed, and Temujin grew into a man shaped by loss but driven by vision. He began gathering allies, not through fear but loyalty. One by one, he won the trust of families and tribes who'd known only betrayal. He promised them something the steppes had never seen: order, justice, even among nomads. He shared the spoils, rewarded loyalty, and punished deceit without hesitation. Word spread. Temujin was not like other chiefs. He didn't raid for plunder, he fought for purpose, but purpose invites enemies. The Mongol tribes had lived for centuries divided by blood feuds. Temujin's dream of unity threatened the fragile balance of hate that kept them apart. Rivals mocked his idealism. Others feared it. And among them rose a name that would haunt him: Jamuka, his blood brother turned bitter foe. Temujin and Jamuka had once sworn eternal friendship, cutting their palms and letting the blood mingle. Together they imagined ruling the steppe as equals. But power is a silent poison. When Temujin's influence grew faster, Jamuka's pride turned to envy. What began as brotherhood became rivalry, then war. When the first clash came, it was unlike any Mongol battle before. Temujin's army was smaller, but it moved like a living machine. He organized his warriors into disciplined units of 10, 100, and 1,000 each man, trained to obey without hesitation. Jamuka's army, though larger, was chaos, warriors fighting for glory. Not strategy, Temujin studied the land, the wind, and the patterns of pursuit. He used feigned retreats, drawing Jamuka's forces deep into the valleys before encircling them. His riders struck from the flanks, their arrows whistling like death's whisper. When Jamuka's men realized the trap, it was too late, but victory came with a price. After the battle, Jamuka retaliated with horror, capturing Temujin's supporters and boiling 70 of them alive. It was a message written in agony. Brotherhood was dead. The steppes would run with blood until one name remained, and yet, in the ashes of that feud, something larger was awakening. Temujin saw that strength alone couldn't build an empire. Fear could win a war, but only loyalty could hold the world together. He began crafting a new code rules that would bind tribes not by blood, but by law. A vision of discipline that would outlive chaos itself. At night, by the campfire, he told his men of a future where no tribe would be abandoned. No warrior left starving as his family once was. His followers began calling him Khan, a title of leadership. But Temujin wanted more than a title. He wanted transformation, a world where every man, woman, and child under his banner could share one destiny. As the steppe winds howled across the plains, Temujin stood on a hill, watching the horizon glow with dawn. Somewhere out there, Jamuka was gathering his armies again, and beyond him lay kingdoms, China's great walls, Persia's deserts, Russia's forests, all waiting. Unaware that a storm was building on the Mongolian plain, the boy who was once left to die was now preparing to reshape the world. But before he could unite the tribes, he would face betrayal once again, this time from within his own blood. The question now was no longer whether Temujin would survive, but whether the world could survive him. The birth of the Wolf Banner. Have you ever seen peace born from blood? Imagine a land where every horizon hides an enemy, and every promise is a lie waiting to strike. That was the steppe. Temujin returned to a sea of dust, wind, and vengeance. Yet from this chaos he would forge something new. Not a tribe, not a kingdom, a nation. And to do it, he would need to become something greater than human. He would need to become legend. Temujin's rise was not declared with drums or ceremony, but with silence. He traveled from camp to camp, humbly offering alliances, gifts, and the one thing no other chieftain dared to give: justice. In the steppes, power was survival, but fairness? That was revolution. He punished theft among his own men, even if it meant executing a friend. He rewarded bravery in the lowest ranks, even if it meant elevating a slave. Slowly his message spread like wildfire. Under Temujin, the strong would protect the weak, and loyalty would outweigh blood. It was unheard of. Mongol life had always been built on family ties and vengeance oaths. Temujin shattered those bonds, replacing them with trust in leadership, discipline, and shared destiny. For the first time, nomads who once fought each other now rode together under one symbol, a black horsehair banner, waving like a storm cloud above their camps. The Wolf Banner. It was said to represent the spirit of the Mongol ancestor, a sacred wolf that never bowed, never broke, and never hunted alone, but unity came with enemies. Rival clans saw his growing power as a threat to the old order. The Tartars, once his father's killers, gathered forces to destroy him before his dream could solidify. Temujin knew that revenge was not just justice, it was strategy. To destroy the Tartars meant more than avenging his father. It would prove to the steppe that his leadership was inevitable. The campaign began under a blood-red dawn. Temujin's army moved with precision never seen among nomads. Scouts reported movements, signal fires flashed across ridges, and orders flowed seamlessly down the chain of command. His warriors didn't charge blindly, they danced through the plains like a single organism. And when the Tartars finally realized the trap closing around them, the Mongols vanished into the mist. That was Temujin's brilliance. He understood the psychology of fear. He used the land as his ally, striking from nowhere, retreating like ghosts, then appearing again miles away. When the Tartars pursued, he ambushed their flanks. When they retreated, he harried their rear. For days, he let exhaustion break them more effectively than blades ever could. Then, when their lines collapsed, he unleashed the full storm. The Mongols swarmed like a wave of thunder. Arrows darkened the sky, horses thundered across the steppe, and the Tartars' cries were drowned in chaos. When it was done, Temujin ordered a grim ritual. Every adult Tartar male was executed. Brutal, yes, but in the world of the steppe it was a message. The age of vengeance was over. Those who lived by chaos would die by it. Those who served unity would inherit the world. It was the moment when fear of Genghis Khan began to spread beyond Mongolia's borders, and yet, even in victory, Temujin's path was shadowed by betrayal. His half-brother, Bektar, envied his growing influence and sought to claim power over the family. One afternoon, as they hunted along a frozen river, Bektar tried to assert dominance, mocking Temujin in front of the others. Something snapped. Temujin and his brother Khasar turned their bows on him. When the arrow flew, it carried not only death, but the last thread of the old Temujin. Killing Bektar was a curse and a cleansing. From that day forward, he would bear the burden of leadership alone. No rivals, no mercy. Only destiny. As his forces grew, so did his understanding of human nature. He learned that men fight for gold but die for respect. So he reshaped his army into a brotherhood. Warriors from rival clans ate together, trained together, and shared the spoils equally. He divided command by merit, not birth. His generals were chosen for brilliance, not bloodline. It was unthinkable in that age, but it worked. His most trusted commanders, Subutai, Jib, Jelm, Kublai rose from humble beginnings. Subutai was the son of a blacksmith, yet would one day conquer half of Europe. Jib, once Temujin's enemy, became his deadliest strategist. It was said Temujin gave him the name Ja, meaning arrow, because he struck straight and true. That was Genghis's genius. He didn't just build armies. He built loyalty through purpose. But fate wasn't done testing him. One night, after returning victorious from a raid, Temujin's wife Bert was captured by the Merkits, the same tribe that had once driven his family into exile. It was as if the ghosts of his childhood had returned. For days he rode without rest, scouring the plains for her. Each hour stretched like a blade across his heart. Bert was more than his queen. She was his anchor, his reason. Losing her meant losing himself. In desperation, he turned to an unlikely ally, his former friend turned rival, Jamuka. Together they attacked the Merkits with fury unmatched. The dawn sky turned red with dust and blood. When the battle ended, Bert was rescued, shaken but alive. Yet beneath the surface, a silent fracture reopened. Jamuka, seeing the loyalty Temujin commanded, knew he could never again be his equal. The brotherhood that had once united them was now a powder keg waiting for a spark, and that spark came sooner than anyone expected. As Temujin's followers crowned him Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, Jamuka declared himself Khan of the traditionalists. The steppe would now be split between the world as it was, and the world as Genghis dreamed it could be. The two armies met again on the open plains, beneath a sky bruised with thunder. Jamuka's forces outnumbered Genghis's nearly 2-1, but discipline would decide the day. Genghis divided his forces into wings, feigned retreat, and drew Jamuka's men into a deadly crescent. Then, like the breaking of a storm, he encircled them from behind. The battle raged for hours, dust and blood swirling as if the earth itself were burning. When it ended, Jamuka's army was shattered. His allies fled. His dream of the old order was gone, but Genghis did not kill his brother. When Jamuka was later captured and brought before him in chains, the great Khan looked into the eyes of the man who had once shared his dreams. Jamuka asked for death without blood, as befit a noble. Genghis granted it, ordering him gently strangled with a bowstring. It was mercy, and it was the final severing of the past. As the flames of Jamuka's pyre died out, a new empire was being born. From the mountains of Siberia to the deserts of China, the tribes of the steppe bent the knee. Under the Valf banner, Genghis Khan's word became law, but across the horizon lay civilizations far older, far richer, and far more arrogant. In the south, the Jin dynasty of China called the Mongols barbarians. In the west, the Khwarezm Empire dismissed them as nomad raiders. None of them yet understood what was coming, because Genghis Khan had united the steppe not merely to survive, but to conquer. And in the next chapter, the wolves would descend from the mountains and the world would burn. The Empire of Smoke and Steel. Have you ever watched the moment when a storm gathers not of clouds, but of men? The earth trembles long before the thunder strikes, and by the time you hear it, it's already too late. That was how the world first felt the approach of Genghis Khan's armies. A whisper on the wind, then hoofbeats like distant thunder. And then silence, the kind that falls only after everything living has fled. By 1206, Temujin was no longer a name of the steppes. He was Genghis Khan, the oceanic ruler, lord of all between the seas. The tribes that had once hunted each other now rode as one, disciplined and merciless. His word had become law. His law had become destiny. But the steppe could no longer contain his ambition. To the south lay China, fractured and wealthy, its cities glittering behind vast walls. To the west stretched the lands of the Khwarezm Empire, where merchants spoke of gold, silk, and arrogance before he struck. Genghis changed the way the world thought about war. Gone were the chaotic raids of the past. In their place stood a machine. His army was built on 10,000 tumens, each divided into hundreds and tens, every soldier knowing his place, his leader, his duty. Communication was lightning fast. Mounted messengers could cover hundreds of miles in a day, passing orders sealed with the Khan's tamga, his mark, and every man, from the lowest archer to the highest general, knew one truth: disobedience was death. But so was failure of justice. If a man's family was killed unjustly, Genghis would punish even a noble. In his empire, loyalty was sacred. It was not loyalty to tribe, not to blood, but to the dream that no Mongol would ever again be hungry, enslaved, or divided. Still, his dream demanded a test, a campaign so vast that it would either break his people or make them immortal. That test began with the northern kingdom of the Jin dynasty in China. The Jin emperors laughed when they heard the Mongols were coming. To them, these were wild horsemen from a frozen wasteland, ignorant of siege warfare or fortresses. But Genghis Khan understood something they didn't. Every fortress has a weakness. Not in its walls, but in its people. He began by capturing smaller border towns. Not through sheer force, but through precision. He'd encircle the city, cut off water, food, and escape, then offer mercy to those who surrendered. To those who resisted, he gave no quarter. Entire garrisons were annihilated. Survivors spread terror ahead of his advance. It was psychological warfare centuries ahead of its time. The Jin armies, once mighty, began to crumble, not because they couldn't fight, but because they couldn't think like him. When the Mongols faced the walled city of Zhengdu, modern-day Beijing, it was said the earth turned black from the siege smoke. Genghis had no siege engines at first, so he learned. Captured engineers from conquered cities were spared, given freedom in exchange for knowledge. Soon the Mongols wielded catapults, trebuchets, and firebombs. The walls that had stood for generations fell before men who had never known brick. For nearly a year, the siege raged. The Jin threw everything at him: poisoned arrows, boiling oil, even burning carts. But Genghis's army was patient. He surrounded the city in layers, cutting it off completely. No food in, no hope out. Starvation became the real weapon. When the city finally fell, its riches were looted, its people scattered. The Mongols didn't destroy for pleasure, they destroyed to teach, and every neighboring kingdom learned. Genghis Khan was not just conquering land. He was rewriting the psychology of empire. He knew that fear could travel faster than any horse. When rumors said his armies rode with demons, he didn't deny them. He let them grow. In a world ruled by fear, myth became the greatest weapon. Yet amid the destruction, Genghis remained strangely pragmatic. He respected talent wherever he found it. A Chinese engineer, a Persian scholar, a Muslim merchant each had value. He allowed religious freedom, rare in his age. He believed that loyalty, not faith, defined a person. It was a simple truth that made his empire more inclusive than many modern nations centuries later, but power breeds hubris, and hubris invites faith. In 1218, Genghis sent a caravan of merchants to trade with the Khwarezm Empire, modern Iran and Central Asia. It was meant as a gesture of peace, a chance to open trade across continents. Instead, it became the spark that would ignite the largest massacre of his reign. The governor of Otrar, suspecting spies, seized the caravan. The merchants were tortured and executed, their goods seized. When Genghis heard, he did not shout. He simply sent 3 envoys to the Khwarezm Shah demanding justice. The Shah, arrogant, impulsive, answered by killing one envoy and humiliating the others. That was his mistake. Genghis Khan swore an oath. I shall exact vengeance so terrible that generations unborn will weep. And he meant every word. The campaign that followed was not conquest, it was annihilation. He assembled 200,000 horsemen, divided them into lightning-fast columns, and unleashed them across the empire. The Mongols crossed deserts no army had ever dared. They carried water in leather bags, hunted for food, and used stars for guidance. They struck like phantoms appearing in cities that thought them weeks away. They built bridges overnight, floated across rivers on inflated skins, and spread disinformation through captured prisoners. No one knew where they'd come from or when they'd vanish. One by one, the cities of Khwarezm fell: Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench. At Bukhara, Genghis entered the city's great mosque and addressed the trembling crowd. If you had not committed great sins, he said, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. His words were calm, almost sorrowful, yet the meaning was thunderous. He did not see himself as a conqueror. He saw himself as an instrument of destiny, but amid his triumph, cracks began to form. His empire stretched wider than any before, but the cost was unimaginable. Entire civilizations vanished. Rivers ran red for weeks. Even his closest generals began to question how much destruction was enough. Still, Genghis was unrelenting. If you cannot be merciful, he told them, then be swift. To him, cruelty was not chaos, it was control. It kept the empire moving, yet deep down, perhaps he sensed what all conquerors eventually do, that empires built on war cannot outlast peace. The fires he lit were consuming everything, even the souls of those who followed him. And then came the moment that would test him like never before. The Shah of Khwarezm fled across the desert, hiding in a fortress island in the Caspian Sea. Genghis sent his son Joki to pursue him. But as the campaign stretched on, whispers began of tension between his sons, of betrayal within his own bloodline. The boy who had once been abandoned on the steppe had built the largest empire the world had ever seen. But now, the cracks were appearing not in his walls, but in his heart, because the greatest battle Genghis Khan would ever fight was not against kings or armies, but against time, blood, and the legacy of his own making. The shadow of the Khan. Have you ever reached the peak of a mountain only to realize the climb had just begun? Genghis Khan had conquered kingdoms, humbled emperors, and turned deserts into highways of conquest. But as his empire stretched across 2 continents, he discovered that ruling the world was far harder than taking it. Every victory widened his borders, but also his burden. And the man who had united the steppe now faced the one enemy even he could not outmaneuver. After the Khwarezm campaign, the Mongol army returned home carrying the silence of the dead. Cities had fallen, kings had vanished, but the question that haunted the great Khan was not how to destroy, but how to preserve. The empire he had built was unlike any before it, vast, diverse, and fragile. From the frozen forests of Siberia to the Persian plains, his banners waved above a dozen faiths and languages. And Genghis knew that if unity had been his greatest weapon, disunity would be his doom. He began to create something revolutionary, a code, not of conquest, but of civilization. It was called the Yusa, a set of laws that bound warriors, merchants, and rulers alike. It forbade theft, betrayal, and cowardice. It rewarded loyalty, courage, and discipline. It commanded respect for women, demanded fairness in judgment, and outlawed infighting among clans. It was part military regulation, part moral compass. In the chaos of war, Genghis had created order, but even as his laws shaped the future, his bloodline threatened to undo it. His sons Joki, Chagatai, Gedai, and Tolui were each born of different mothers, each ambitious and each carrying a piece of their father's fire. The oldest, Joki, had always been distant, haunted by whispers that he was not truly Genghis's son, but the child of Bert's abduction by the Merkits. Though Genghis had never spoken it aloud, the doubt lingered in the air between them like smoke. When he began dividing the empire's future lands, the tension erupted into open resentment. At one war council, Joki clashed with his brother Chagatai so violently that their words nearly became blades. The tent fell silent and all eyes turned to the Khan. His face, once the calm of command, showed something rare: sorrow. He loved his sons, but he loved the empire more. A single arrow breaks easily, he told them, but a bundle cannot be broken. Yet even he could feel the bundle fraying. To restore focus, he turned his attention east, toward Xia and the remnants of the Jin. Though China's north had fallen, pockets of resistance remained. Genghis launched one final campaign to finish what he had started, but by then he was no longer the young conqueror who had raced across the plains. The years had carved into him a deeper, quieter resolve. His once black hair had turned to steel, his hands calloused from decades of war. The campaign began like all others with efficiency and terror. The Mongols advanced through desert and mountain, destroying fortresses and forcing surrender without mercy. But Genghis was no longer fighting merely for territory. He wanted legacy. He wanted the world to remember his name not as a destroyer, but as the creator of a new order. Still, destiny rarely grants such balance. During the siege of a fortress in Westra, the great Khan was thrown from his horse. The fall broke his ribs, and though he rose again, something inside him never healed. Yet he refused to stop. Each morning he would ride to the front lines, wincing with pain but speaking with fire. His men said his spirit was larger than his body, his will larger than his pain. But even legends must bend to mortality. When Xie finally fell, its rulers begged for mercy. Genghis, fevered and weary, granted none. The city was burned, its people scattered, its lands absorbed into his domain. It was his last conquest, his final victory, and perhaps his most hollow. Because as the flames rose into the desert sky, the great Khan lay in his tent, surrounded by his generals and sons. His breath shallow and slow. Outside, the wind howled like it did when he was a boy alone on the steppe, staring at a horizon that promised nothing. Inside, his thoughts drifted back to his mother's face, his father's poison, the night he escaped captivity, the blood of Jamuka, the love of Bert, the laughter of his children before they became warriors. Every memory was a battlefield of its own. They say his last words were not of empire, but of wonder. He whispered, "The greatest happiness is to vanquish your enemies, and to hear the lamentation of their women." Yet those close to him believed that in his final moments, he also murmured another truth, one softer, almost lost to the wind. "Remember, a leader is not greater than his people." When the sun rose the next day, the camp was silent. Genghis Khan was dead. The news spread in whispers across Asia, for his generals had sworn to keep his death secret until the army returned home. His body was carried across thousands of miles to be buried in a place no one would ever find. Legend says that every witness to his funeral procession was slain to protect the secret. Some claim the rivers were diverted to hide his grave forever. No stone marks it, no monument stands. And yet his shadow lies across continents, but the story did not end there. Before his death, Genghis chose Gedai, his third son, as successor. It was a decision that shocked many and angered Joki's line, sowing seeds that would one day split the empire into 4 great khanates. Yet for a brief, miraculous time his dream endured. The Mongol Empire continued to expand under his heir, stretching from the Pacific to the gates of Vienna. The largest contiguous empire in human history. And though centuries have passed, one question still echoes. How did a boy abandoned on the steppe create a system that could outlast empires and outthink kingdoms? Was it luck? Destiny? Or was it something deeper, a truth about humanity itself? That unity, discipline, and vision can rise even from the ashes of despair. But before that truth could unfold, a darker age was already dawning. The empire that Genghis built would soon face the one trial he never could peace. And peace, in the hands of conquerors, can be deadlier than war. The sons of the Volf, what happens to a storm when the thunder dies? When the man who summoned the winds is gone, what becomes of those who only learn to follow them? The death of Genghis Khan did not bring silence, it brought a dangerous stillness. Like the pause between lightning strikes, it was charged with power, ambition, and fear. His empire, so vast it bent the horizon, now lay in the hands of men born from his shadow, but not his wisdom. The sons of the Volf were about to test whether they were hunters or prey. The news of Genghis Khan's death was carried like a ghost across the steppes. Few knew it at first. The generals whispered it only to the most trusted. The Mongol army, still deep in the campaign, continued to march under his banners as if he were alive. They knew the truth. If word spread too soon, rebellion would follow, and the empire he had built in a lifetime could crumble in a single moon. So they kept the illusion. The Khan lives, they said. The Khan commands. The Khan rides with us still, but even ghosts cannot rule forever. When the army returned home, the great council, the Kurultai, was summoned to choose the next ruler. There were 3 names in every whisper: Joki, Chagatai, and Gedai. Joki, the eldest, had died not long before his father, but his sons Beta and Orda stood tall, fierce, and ambitious. Chagatai was sharp and proud, but too quick to anger. And Gedai, the 3rd son, was calm, deliberate, and blessed, or cursed with the patience of his mother. Genghis had chosen him before his death, knowing that strength was not always in the sword, but in the hand that holds it steady. The council gathered on the plains of the Onan River. For days, the air was heavy with debate. Old wounds reopened. Joki's descendants argued that lineage should rule. Chagatai thundered that obedience to the Khan's last word was sacred. And then Gedai spoke, not with fire but with quiet conviction. My father conquered the world, he said, but his true conquest was the hearts of men. If we divide them, we undo him. Those words settled over the gathering like dawn breaking after storm clouds. One by one, the generals bowed. The empire had a new Khan. Gedai's first act was not war, but restoration. He ordered the rebuilding of the roads, the fortifications, the postal relay system that tied the empire together. The Yem, hundreds of way stations spanned thousands of miles, carrying messages faster than any civilization before. The empire became a living organism, breathing through its arteries of trade and communication. And at the center of it all rose a new city, unlike any the steppes had ever seen. Karum. Built on the banks of the Orkhon River, Karakorum was a paradox of worlds. Marble from China, gold from Samarkand, architects from Persia, craftsmen from every corner of conquest. Temples to every faith stood side by side: Buddhist shrines, Christian chapels, Muslim mosques, all under the same sky. The capital of an empire that believed in one rule above all: loyalty to the dream of Genghis Khan. But while Gedai built walls and laws, his brothers and nephews dreamed of battle. Beta, the son of Joki, yearned westward. He spoke of lands beyond the steppes, of strange armored knights, castles that pierced the clouds, and cities rich enough to feed armies for years. He called it the Golden Campaign. Gedai hesitated, but the blood of his father burned too deep to deny it. The West would test the Mongol name once more. In 1236, the hooves thundered again. The Mongol army swept across the Volga, into the lands of the Rus. Cities like Ryazan, Vladimir, and Kiev fell in waves of flame. Beta commanded the armies, but the true mastermind rode beside him, Subutai, the old general who had once served Genghis himself. His mind was a map of movement, his instinct sharper than any blade. Together they crushed everything in their path. At the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, the Mongols used rivers and bridges as traps, encircling European knights with devastating precision. It was the old Volf spirit alive in younger hands, but for all their victories, something had changed. These conquests were no longer the work of necessity or vision, they were conquest for its own sake. The unity Genghis had built began to fracture under the weight of ambition. Gedai, though wise, was also human. The years of rule, the loneliness of power, and the endless expectation broke something inside him. He began to drink heavily. By the time the empire had reached the gates of Vienna, news arrived that the great Khan was dead collapsed after a feast, wine still on his lips. Once again, the Mongols halted. Tradition demanded that all campaigns cease until a new Khan was chosen. The Western invasion ended not by battle, but by death. It was as if fate itself had pulled the reins. The next Kurultai was chaos. Shagatai's descendants warred with Jokis, while Tolui's sons Mengi, Kublai, and Hulagu watched with patient calculation. The empire had become too large, too rich, too stretched for one throne. What Genghis had united, time was now beginning to divide. Mengi eventually rose as Khan, stern and relentless, restoring order for a while. Under his rule, the Mongols invaded the Middle East again, where Hulagu would burn Baghdad to the ground in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate that had stood for centuries. The world trembled once more at the Mongol name, and yet, for every victory, another piece of the unity cracked away. In the east, Kublai, grandson of Genghis, turned his gaze to China, where the Song dynasty still ruled. He studied their culture, admired their administration, and sought not to destroy, but to rule. It was a different dream from his grandfather's, a dream of civilization, not just conquest. While Hulagu bathed the West in fire, Kublai built the foundations of a dynasty that would rule China for a century. The Yuan, two visions were emerging, one of empire through destruction, the other through governance. The wolves that once hunted together now followed different scents, and as the years rolled on, the great Mongol Empire, the empire of smoke and steel, born from a boy's vow under a cold sky, began to splinter. Beta's descendants ruled the West as the Golden Horde. Hulag's line the Ilkhanate in Persia, Kublai the Yuan in China, and Shagatai's heirs in Central Asia, each claimed the legacy of Genghis Khan, each swore they upheld his vision, and yet each fought the others in his name. Still, one truth remained unbroken. No matter how divided the empire became, no man dared erase the name of Genghis Khan. His spirit was not a kingdom or a crown. It was a law written in blood and memory. A reminder that one man, born in exile, had once bent the world to his will, but empires, like men, are mortal. The Mongol Empire would eventually fade, its descendants absorbed into the very civilizations they conquered. Yet long after its fall, whispers remained of how a horseman from the steppe had changed the world forever, and just when history began to quiet, one final chapter would rise a legacy not of war, but of immortality. Because the empire may have died, but the legend of Genghis Khan was only beginning to conquer time itself. The eternal echo of the steppe. Have you ever wondered what remains when empires turn to dust? When the banners rot, the walls crumble, and even the conqueror's bones return to the earth, what endures? The story of Genghis Khan does not end with his death, nor with the fading of his empire. His true conquest was never just of land or kings, it was of the human spirit. His vision outlived him, stretching across centuries, whispering through bloodlines, across deserts and dynasties, reshaping the world in ways unseen. Long after his burial beneath the unknown earth of Mongolia, the memory of Genghis Khan became both a weapon and a prayer. His descendants ruled from the Yellow Sea to the Black Sea, traders rode the Silk Road under his laws. His couriers carried messages faster than any in history, linking the continents with the pulse of empire. For the first time, Europe and Asia were connected, not by peace, but by order. His Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, turned terror into stability. Under it, scholars traveled safely from Baghdad to Beijing, merchants from Venice to Karakorum. Paper money, diplomacy, and cross-continental trade thrived in the ashes of conquest. Ironically, the same man who had once burned cities had also built the bridges that would lead to the modern world. His empire made maps out of myth, stitching together civilizations that had never spoken before. Through Mongol messengers came silk, spices, and science, alchemy, astronomy, gunpowder, the compass. Knowledge crossed borders that swords once divided. And in this exchange, the echoes of Genghis Khan shaped the very rhythm of history. But time, as always, is the final victor. By the late 14th century, the great Mongol realms began to fracture completely. The Yuan dynasty in China fell to rebellion. The Golden Horde splintered into rival khanates. Persia reclaimed its independence. Yet the Mongol name did not vanish, it transformed. It became legend, myth, and memory. The warrior who once stood alone on the steppe now stood eternal in stories told by the very people he once conquered. In the centuries that followed, travelers like Marco Polo carried those stories to distant lands. He described the court of Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis, as a place of marvels beyond imagining, where gold flowed like rivers and knowledge was prized above all. Europe listened, half in awe, half in disbelief. The tales seemed impossible, but they carried one truth. The East had been united once by a single man, a man who changed the balance of the world. In Mongolia, his memory never died. Every mountain, every river, every whispering wind carried his spirit. His people called him the father of the nation. Even after centuries of foreign domination, the name Genghis Khan could still summon pride and tears in equal measure. In their hearts, he remained not a conqueror, but a protector, a symbol of endurance, resilience, and unity, and perhaps that was the final twist of his legacy. The same man who had once ordered cities burned to the ground became a symbol of national rebirth. His face, once feared across continents, now watches over Mongolia's currency, its monuments, its people. Each November, when the steppe winds turn cold, the descendants of those who once rode under his banner still speak his name with reverence, but his shadow stretches beyond Mongolia. The blood of Genghis Khan runs through millions. Some historians estimate as many as 16 million men across Eurasia carry his Y chromosome, a silent genetic footprint that defies time. In a sense, he achieved what even gods envy, immortality, not in temples or scripture, but in the living pulse of humanity itself. Yet with immortality comes paradox. For all his brilliance, his empire brought ruin as much as it brought order. Whole cities vanished under his hooves. Libraries burned. Civilizations were silenced. The duality of Genghis Khan remains unresolved. Was he a destroyer or a visionary? A monster or a maker of worlds? History refuses to decide, and maybe that is the truest measure of his power. To command both fear and admiration long after death is to become something greater than mortal. In the steppe, where his story began, legends say that when thunder rolls across the plains, it is the hooves of Genghis Khan's riders returning to the world. That when a wolf howls at the horizon, it is the spirit of the Khan calling his people to remember who they are. And perhaps on some silent night beneath that endless Mongolian sky, a horse still runs unseen across the grasslands, its mane like smoke, its shadow like memory carrying the soul of the boy who was once left to die. He began as Temujin, the orphan with nothing. He became Genghis Khan, the ruler of everything. His empire may have fallen, but his vision, discipline, unity, purpose remains carved into the bones of civilization. Every army that moves with precision, every law that values merit over birth, every leader who seeks to unite divided people carries a spark of that ancient fire, and as the wind sweeps over the Mongolian steppe, carrying the dust of forgotten empires, one truth still rides upon it. Power is fleeting. Glory fades. But vision endures. The boy who once stood hungry beneath a cold sky became the man who fed the world with his will. The son of exile became the father of nations. And though centuries have buried his name beneath layers of history, the echo of Genghis Khan still thunders quietly in every corner of the earth, because some storms never die. They simply change the shape of the sky, the END,